British buses. When you hear that term, you automatically think double-deckers. But the British have been building many fine single-decker buses for as long as they have had double-deckers. One of the most iconic single-deckers of the 1970s and 80s was the Leyland National. Designed by sports car stylist Giovanni Michelotti, it was developed for the UK's markets around the world. This is the story of the amazing but flawed design process of the Leyland National single-decker bus. Hi, this is Jeffrey. And as someone who has a big interest in British buses, but is obviously not British, one of the more interesting buses that ran in the UK during the 1970s and 1980s was the Leyland National. Now, this bus was unusual for a number of reasons. It was designed by an auto stylist. It was designed from the ground up to be modular in concept, and it was built at a brand new automated factory built specifically to manufacture the Leyland National. Now, there were several versions of the Leyland National, and the version that I like the best is the original Mark I. That was the best version of the Leyland National to me. There was the Mark I Series B and then the Leyland National 2, but I did not like those two other versions as much as the original Leyland National. Now, I found on the internet at a site called Zavanac.com a whole web page on how the Leyland National was designed, and it was just absolutely fantastic to see because you don't really see much out there on how a specific model bus was designed. Now, this site is run by a professor named Eric Woodcock. I believe he teaches at a university in Liverpool, and I've been trying to contact him. Unfortunately, I have not been able to receive a reply, but it does say on his site that the information on it can be used for educational purposes, and so that's the purpose of this video. It is educational. Now, the Leyland National was also designed for major exports, but unfortunately for Leyland, they never achieved that. They did sell some exports, I think probably less than 1,000 units, but they never achieved the goal of selling this bus, in large quantities worldwide. So let's get started in looking at how the Leyland National was designed and engineered, because it's really a fascinating story. To start with, here we see a National prototype at a housing estate. The simple front end and roof treatment is somewhat pleasing, but gave way to more refined shapes and accents in the production version. This model may be a styling exercise that fortunately didn't make it into production. It's at the British Commercial Vehicle Museum in Leyland. Interesting that it was painted in the livery of a small local independent bus company and not that of an operator like London Transport. The test program of the Leyland National was extremely thorough. This wind tunnel test took place at the Motor Industry Research Association. It was studying the vortex generated under the bus, which looks like it would throw a lot of dirty water against the rear end. The Leyland National was offered in two basic versions, either 10.3 meters long or 11.3 meters long. The respective lengths were determined by the choice of window bays, which could be 1,218 millimeters or 1,421 millimeters long. Interestingly, neither dimension translates into an obvious imperial equivalent. Here are the main dimensions of the 11.3 meter National. The main floor height is 634 millimeters, which does translate exactly as 25 inches. Ergonomic studies aimed to optimize the window and ceiling heights of the National. Nevertheless, the decision was made to have a constant waistline down the bus, even though the rear of the saloon was higher. The result was that shorter passengers in the front section had a window line that seemed unnaturally high. Ergonomic work also took place to try and find the most comfortable step height. Some may say that the passenger demonstrating the step is Peter Wingard, also known as Jason King, showing off the styling of the late 1960s male fashion and grooming. These two people demonstrate the wide doorway and comparatively low step height of the National. You put your left leg in, your left leg out, in, out, etc., etc. These diagrams suggest different seating arrangements possible on the 10.3 meter National. The rather spaced out seating in the rear section is evident. This helped to keep the load on the rear axle down. Axle loadings proved a handicap to sales in several territories where regulations were tougher than in the UK. Although the National was nominally offered in two lengths, a third length of 10.9 meters could be built. This used longer window bays in the wheelbase and shorter ones for the rear section. It was aimed specifically at Australia, which also set a lower than usual rear axle weight limit, restricting the passenger load in the rear section. The product planners were supposed to have done lots of research on regulations around the world that would set design constraints, especially in key target markets like Australia. Seems like they weren't as thorough as one might have hoped. This picture is supposed to show the common elements in pink between the 11.3 and 10.3 meter long Nationals. However, a close look is a bit puzzling. The skirt panel behind the rear wheel doesn't look common, whereas the tail skirt and rear bumper do. The National was of course an integral bus. The rear end arrangement had to be compact in order to make space for the radiator and also fit inside the 10.3 meter version's short rear overhang. At the same time, it had to allow a reasonable amount of vertical movement in the prop shaft. The solution was to send the drive from the gearbox through a hole in the rear axle case into a transfer box and then back to the differential. That's clever. Low-profile tires were selected to keep the floor height down. This diagram shows that the bus was designed so that the front and rear underbody profiles enabled acceptable departure angles to be maintained. The National featured more stylish jackknife doors than contemporary buses. These engineers seem to be doing some tests on them, but it is not clear what. At one stage, Leyland proposed a new design of seats for the National. Aside from the covering, it didn't look all that radical or different. Experiments took place at the Transport and Road Research Laboratory, subjecting the prototype seat to a simulated frontal impact. The big positive was that the seat stayed in one piece rather than snapping, which would have led to worse injuries for the poor dummy, not to mention humans. One of the advanced features of the National was the heating system. It fed pressurized warm air from the distinctive roof pod into a plenum chamber extending through the roof space. Vents then directed air down across the windscreen, windows, and doors. The idea was that this system would eliminate the horrors of cold windows dripping with condensation. The reality wasn't always quite so effective. And just look at the illustration on the left. This exploded view shows the main structural elements of the National. The sides, roof, ends, dash panel, and underframe were separately fabricated. Then they were brought together like a model kit using highly mechanized equipment. In contrast to an exploded view, this is a cutaway. Look closely and we can see the driver's compartment, the front suspension, the fuel tank, the rear axle, the engine and gearbox, the radiator, and on the roof, the heater units. Leyland boasted that even in a 20-mile-per-hour frontal impact, the National body structure would protect the driver. A prototype was subjected to this test at the Transport and Road Research Laboratory. A superfast camera shows how the first bay remains largely intact. The driver looks like he would be injured, but not as badly as if the front end of the vehicle had been totally destroyed. Zooming out presents a less reassuring picture though. This photograph was released to the press, but close examination shows the passengers might come off a lot worse than the driver. Anyone sitting on a side seat over the front wheel would be in an area that was deliberately designed to crush and absorb lots of energy. Also, notice the dummy that was sitting by the letter A behind the rear wheel. The force of the impact has thrown them forward to be struck in the throat by the seat in front of them. Inspired by contemporary American buses such as the GM New Look, Leyland decided to hold the Leyland National together with rivets. The Avdel rivet system enabled the bus to be constructed by semi-skilled personnel rather than the skilled craftspeople employed by traditional coach builders. This front-end structure was probably put together for test purposes and clearly shows the link between the underframe and the side walls. The side walls were deliberately slightly bowed to de-emphasize the slab-sided effect of a large box. A National Mark I undergoing the tilt test to confirm that fully laden, the bus could remain stable on a platform tipped to 40 degrees. The mechanic in the pit, who may be hard to notice, appears confident that the bus will pass. A major part of the national program was building a brand new factory at Lillyhall outside Workington in Cumbria. The area had no tradition of automotive manufacturing, but Leyland was induced to put it there by the UK government. The aim was to create employment for people coming out of the local declining coal and steel industries. The degree of automation for a bus factory is still truly amazing. Those are seat cushions coming down in trays via the overhead conveyor. This publicity photo shows off the clean and attractive lines of a Crossville National Mark I with coach-style seats. The rear end treatment is let down by the backs of the rearmost seats being so visibly high into the windows. Another National Mark I publicity shot, this time of the Suburban Express. This had a high floor all the way through, trading an extra step into the saloon for a decent outside view for all passengers. This is an interior shot of the same bus. Note the luggage racks. Although intended to secure substantial global sales, the National performed poorly in export markets. The biggest order was for 450 buses from the city of Caracas, Venezuela. They entered service in 1975 and 1976. These photos were taken in Caracas in 1999 by Eric Woodcock. These vehicles were parked in a yard near the city center. Obviously retired, they nevertheless looked in reasonable condition. Little sign of body damage and no broken windows. The uneven rhythm of the window bays on the 10.3-meter National 2 shows up well on this Burnley and Pendle National, seen in November 1979. In 1976, the design was updated to create the National 2, and one of the changes was to reduce the size of the roof pod. The modular character of the National body system allowed a large number of possible variations of doors, windows, and seats. This is the interior of an airside bus. It was designed to rapidly load a number of people on one side from the aircraft, take them to the terminal, and disembark them on the other, and vice versa. The Super National Business Commuter was an attempt to breathe some marketing magic into declining sales of the National. The concept was for a small group of executives to be sped from point A to B, aided by a crew of helpful assistants making coffee and typing memos up at the front. It didn't catch on. An absence of opening windows indicates that the business commuter was air-conditioned. At some point, the standard roof pod was replaced by a larger unit containing the AC equipment. Among the offbeat applications Nationals found themselves fulfilling was as a mobile bank. Midland Bank was running this one in North Yorkshire in August of 1980. This Mark I National has been adapted to take a wheelchair lift in the front doorway. Used for a service linking Heathrow Airport with London rail terminals, it is seen at Paddington in July of 1986. Many operators regarded the National as too complex compared with the single-deckers they bought previously. In response, Leyland developed the B Series. This had a simpler heating and ventilation system in which the roof pod was removed. At first, it was only offered in a 10.3 meter format, but with the announcement of the National 2 in 1978, this option was extended to the longer variant. West Yorkshire 1501 was delivered in 1979 and stands at Bradford Interchange in January of 1981. Leyland independent John Fishwick & Sons went out of business in October of 2015. Naturally, it was a loyal purchaser of local Leyland products. This view from February of 1980 shows number 29, a 1977 National, next to number 10, a brand new National 2. The front radiator, double curvature windscreen, and more compact roof pod are obvious differences. London Transport gave Leyland a major boost when it started ordering hundreds of Nationals starting in 1973. London is an obvious demonstration for export sales, although the National sales performance outside the UK was poor. In the late 1970s, a small number of operators decided to try articulated buses as an alternative to double-deckers. Volvo and Mercedes-Benz were naturally keen as they already made them. Leyland responded by fitting Leyland National body elements onto a chassis from DAB, a Danish bus builder owned by Leyland. This was another attempt to get more volume out of the Workington factory. The result of bolting a Leyland National body to an underfloor engined chassis was not especially harmonious. Here is one of the fleet of 5 trialed by South Yorkshire PTE in 1979. It is seen in Sheffield in September of 1981. The uneasy partnership between chassis and body is emphasized in this view of South Yorkshire PTE 2008, taken at the same time. The Lillyhall factory was adapted to build other products after Leyland National bus production ceased in 1985. It closed around 1993 and became a distribution depot for Eddie Stobart and later Great Bear. When Eric Woodcock took this picture in June of 2024, the site was deserted. In 1976, he spent some time working in the drawing section of the office block, doing seating layouts for the suburban Nationals. Let's end with a mystery. Professor Woodcock can't find any information about this photograph and the story behind it. This Ribble National has found itself in a waterway, presumably after some mishap. But when, where, and why? If anybody knows, please comment. So there it is, the very interesting but somewhat flawed engineering and design that went into the Leyland National bus. Now, I am not a big super expert on the Leyland National. I'm looking at it from a distance as an enthusiast, as someone who was interested in how the Leyland National was designed and built. So I'm sure that there are people out there who know a lot more than I do, and if you have anything to add, please put it into the comments. I'm sure that there are going to be people who loved the bus and people who hated the bus. It's kind of like my Grumman bus videos, where some people loved the Grumman Flexible 870 and some people absolutely hated it. So I know I will get comments on both sides. And if you watched this video to the end, well, thank you so much for doing so. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the flawed but very interesting engineering that went into the Leyland National bus. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.